My name is Rubab Qureshi. I'm one of the team leaders. You've been hearing a lot today about various ways that we've been trying to improve the experience of curriculum planning, and today we're talking specifically right now about lesson planning.
My name is Greta Lundgaard, and I'm up here. Rubab and I are going to be working with you this afternoon, and I would just like to say thank you so much for being here.
Yes.
We know it's been a really, really long day, and we're going to do our best to get through the main important things you need to know about the learning plan in this 1 hour that we have left today.
Yes.
Okay?
So of all the components of what you've seen today, and we've talked about the program proposal, the curriculum template, and right now, right in the middle of everything in this wonderful slide you'll see is the learning plan. This is definitely where we know this is what goes in front of our students. So the learning experience for our students is really kind of mapped out in a learning plan. And so we're going to be talking at length today about how that is not necessarily changed this year as much. So there's different kind of terminology. The nomenclature has changed a little bit. So we'll just walk you through those steps to kind of explain those things for you. Do I have the clicker? Where is the clicker?
Okay, we've lost our clicker.
So this morning, Laura was talking about some of the things to do with the learning plan, and these are some of the terms that we've talked about, growth and learning, and these are all part of how we're trying to improve the experience of learning for our students. And it's okay, the first thing we want to do is just kind of alleviate some of your fears about these changes. Just keep calm, pretend it's the lesson plan, and it's the learning plan now that we're talking about. So just, it's terms that need to be changed a little bit, not much more. The learning targets, and we want to talk about these. If you look at some of these statements here, they're all exactly how we see them in the curriculum template. So I can explain the connection between a lesson and a learning experience. That's what we want you to be able to do by the end of today's session. I can unpack a can-do statement into individual learning targets, and we'll talk more about what those are. I can design a check for learning for each learning target. And you'll hear this term a lot, a check for learning. Why are we going to be talking more and more about this? So keep that in mind. Those are some key words. And I can explain the learning plan requirements to instructors in my programs. We know that many of you here will not be necessarily coming up with their learning plans yourself. You're going to be taking this information back to your individual programs and helping them go through this. And we've provided you with lots of resources on where to go to facilitate that training as well. So, what are the characteristics of an effective learning activity or learning plan for you? Just for a minute, think about this. At your table or to a partner sitting next to you, however you want to do it, how would you reflect on a lesson that you either experienced or have seen, and why did you think that was an effective learning plan? What did you see or hear that to you defined it as an effective way to teach something or for the students to learn something? So just take a minute. Okay, so if we come back and look at some of the terms that are popping up over here, did some of these terms come up in your conversation or discussion with your table mates there? What do you see here that is kind of there? So it's aligned, it's efficient, you have a focus, you have a flow to a learning plan. We've all walked into classrooms where we see a certain flow to the learning that's happening, and it's very, very fluid. Differentiated, there's evidence of learning. All of these are characteristics of an effective learning plan. And it's really hard to capture this and say, well, how do we make sure this is happening? Well, we're trying to do that through these learning plans. So here's an overview of what a learning plan is going to be looking like for you. So there's certain bullet points here. Just take a minute and read through these bullet points. And we'll let them come up very slowly for you. So your learning plan connects the learning targets identified in the curriculum overview, the curriculum template that we've had you do. And it requires programs to identify learning targets and successes measure on a daily basis for completing stages 1 and 2 of all the learning experiences. It provides context for a site visit team when they've come to see your program as well. And it also provides instructional data for STARTALK Central when plans for the day before the day of the site visit, the day of the site visit, and the day after. And you can share them with STARTALK Central. So how would you design, do you want to hear that?
So this is something that, you remember Laura was talking a little bit earlier in the day of that. We all are coming to this with a different lens. We're all looking at things a little bit different. But because these are STARTALK programs and we're accepting STARTALK funding to put our programs on, we are going to have STARTALK definitions, okay? So that we all, at least in the context of STARTALK programs, know that when we say a lesson and a learning plan and a learning episode, we're talking about the same thing. So this first block that you see here, this is our definition of a lesson. Okay? It's a series of learning episodes. And if we think about this, we intuitively do it. When we teach a lesson, even if we think of my 1 day's lesson or my 60-minute class period or 90-minute class period, as instructors, we know that we chunk up that lesson, right? Even though we are going to get to this place by the end of the day, we also don't just teach 90 minutes straight. We pause and check for learning before we go to the next step, and we pause and check for learning before we go to the next step. And so all this learning plan is really asking us to do is to define those chunks so that other people can see those chunks. If I'm not in your classroom or your instructor's classrooms, if I look at this new learning plan, I can now see your chunked up lesson. Does that make sense? And so this word learning episode, this is the term that STARTALK has chosen to just adopt. We could call it a learning experience. We could call it a chunk. I kind of, the thing I like the best is just to say the learning chunk. This is this chunk of practice and information and content that we're going to do. But learning episode is what I'm going to use when I think about this. So here is then the definition of what a learning episode is. And based on research, brain research, no matter what language we're learning, or no matter how complex the learning, this could be calculus, or this could be addition, research tells us that the brain can really only handle about 30 minutes at a time before I need to pause and consolidate my learning. Younger students can't even go that long. How many of you have or have grandchildren or children that are less than 10 years old? Oh, 30 minutes is a very long time. That's a long time. Right? So another little rule of thumb is, or the age of the learner. So if I'm working with 10-year-olds, they may only be able to go 10 or 15 minutes before I'm going to ask them to pause and consolidate your learning. Pause and let me check for learning before I go on. Does that make sense? What we really don't want everyone to fret about is the word learning episode.
I think another analogy to help here is we think of learning episodes, but also think of shows that you watch. How many people are watching television shows? It's one episode after another. You can make the connection from, if you go right into the middle of a show, everyone has on demand right now, right? Right. So if you try and jump right into the middle of a show or of a serial that you're watching, you have no idea what's happening. The episodes have to be connected to one another. So the first one is leading into the second one. The second one's going to give you information to lead to the third one. So that's where that's why we're calling them episodes too. So there's a sequence to that. And that's very, very important for understanding how this is happening. So you can have any number of learning episodes, but they are also going to be targeted to the learning targets that are coming from the curriculum template. So there's a reason why that's the context for why we're doing it this way.
And just following up on Rubab's analogy, think back, you know, when we binge watch Damages or whatever it is on Netflix, which is what I'm watching right now, they always begin the next episode with what?
A recap.
A recap. And that, you know, is that connection. It's really a check for learning, isn't it? Before we start this new episode, I'm going to check to make sure you understand all these really weird things that happened in the previous episode, so you'll know who the bad guy is and who the good guy is. So think about it like that. That's a great analogy that Rubab gave. So here's another way to think about it, because we're all, again, we're coming to this from different lenses. So here's a visual of it. So here's my lesson, and underneath it, I've got steps. And you might even think of these 3 rows as maybe these are my novice mids, in the middle is my novice highs, maybe here's my intermediates. And what the check for learning might be very, very similar for a novice mid and an intermediate low, but my expectation of what they're going to give back to me, right? Novice mids are not going to give me as much as an intermediate low will give me back, right? So that's another way to think about it, is they are all linked and they're connected with this overarching can-do statement that we're going to talk about in a minute. So here's our check for learning. Okay, here's a little check for learning. So STARTALK has said a learning episode is defined as a learning experience that addresses a specific learning target, and it should be approximately 30 minutes. I shouldn't really go longer than that without doing a check for learning. Okay, Rubab, we've been talking for 15 minutes, but this is kind of really dense material, so we're going to do a check for learning right now. We didn't even wait for 30 minutes. So here's a typical daily schedule. So just take a minute, look at these, and we're going to just say, I've got high schoolers and they can go 30 minutes. How many checks for learning do I need to have? How many learning episodes? And just think to yourself, okay, there is a wrong answer. Okay, I'll say that, right? There might be 2 or 3 right answers, but there's a wrong answer. How many learning episodes do you think? And when you think you have a number, just put your hand on your head. When you think you have a number, so we know when, I want to give you a chance to think. When you think you have a number, put your hand on your head. How many do you think this might be? Okay, how many do you think this might be? Okay, is everybody ready? Well, I've got opening activity. I'm probably going to check that my opening activity did what I wanted it to do. Then I have 1 hour of class. About how many learning checks should that be? Okay. Now, I've got a break. Okay, whatever. So that's free. That's a gimme. Okay, now I've got another hour of learning. How many checks? Okay, probably 1 in the middle and 1 at the end. Now, lunch, activity period. I don't know what the activity period is, but I'm going to just give everyone a break, right? Then I have another hour of class. How many checks? 2. Then I've got personal learning initiatives. Are those exempt? Is that just like play Minecraft for an hour? No, I need to check. They should have a goal. What was your personal learning goal for today, and did you get it? Maybe 1, maybe 2. And then I've got wrap up, and it says formative assessment. So what does that mean? There's another one. So I would say, okay, I would say about 11. Did anybody get within 1 or 2 of 11? Okay. You know, and what you need to kind of also ease your mind, we're not going to be sitting there watching you the whole day and counting up, right?
Yeah.
We're not evaluating your learning plan. But what we do want to see is that you have planned a check for learning. You've planned it. Okay? The intentionality is the most important thing. And here's this research that gave us this number of about 30 minutes. And this is from Daniel Sousa, or is it David? Sorry, Daniel is the author. David Sousa, which is a great, How the Brain Learns. It's a great book. So he says, well, here's my first, I'm going to get their attention, activate their prior knowledge. Here's my input phase. And this could be me, this could be a video, this could be reading, this could be watching of someone else. And then here's where we process and practice together. And then here is where an I check for learning. And he says 20, 30 minutes. So it's the research that tells us that this is the right number. Okay, does everybody understand this? It's not a math formula where it's hard and fast, just one answer. But generally speaking, we need to pause and check for learning before we move on. Okay?
And the reason why we're emphasizing this so much is because very often we'll walk into a classroom and the teacher is working very, very hard. Our STARTALK teachers are tireless, resourceful, and exhausted many, many times during the time that we're seeing them at a site visit, but we also know that's taking place all the time. A check for learning after each of these episodes lets the teacher know, oh, well, you know what, actually, my students might be exhausted too. They need to kind of come back and regroup a little bit. Maybe I need to spend a bit more time on a particular target that we were working on, or maybe we can go right ahead and move on to the next phase of it. The check for learning is a way for them to adjust things as needed, as the lessons are progressing.
Okay, very good. So, on page 38 and 39 of your program director guide,
If you pull that out.
if you want to have that handy, we're going to reference this a couple of times because these are all resources for you to access. We've really put a lot of thought in how can we make this as clear and as easy as possible, because it's not anything new, okay, but what it is it's just revealing it in a more intentional way, okay? So stage 2 of the learning plan addresses the check for learning, okay? Page 38 and 39 in your spiral bound book, your spiral book.
So we're now coming back to the can-do statements from the curriculum template. If you go back to the very first slide we showed, we talked about the first step is your proposal, the second step is your curriculum template, third, right in the middle, is your learning plan. Where are the can-do statements coming from? They're coming straight from, actually these days now, we've had you do the can-do statements in your proposal. They're coming into your template. Now they're actually coming to the micro level into your lesson plans, and then we're going to break those down further. Everyone has talked about or seen these terms. So we've got the global benchmarks. This is what you selected in the proposal, then also into the template. The next step is now all of these learning targets that you have in the orange boxes here. So one of the key complaints in previous years was that it was difficult to connect the former lesson plan to the curriculum template. And the revised learning plan addresses that concern. That's why we're spending so much time on it right now. The learning targets are unpacked directly from the global benchmarks and can-do statements, and that appeared on the templates and are cited on the learning plan template. The next slide shows us what it looks like on the actual template.
You know, Rubab, before we go further, let's think about this word unpack.
Okay.
Okay, because we're going to use it several times. So here I have, this is a good example. So look here at number 12. Okay, this is my program can-do statement. I can ask and answer simple questions about family, animals, likes, and dislikes. So that might be my can-do statement for 1 day or 2 days. It might be the same, or it might just be a half a day. Okay? So when we say unpack that learning target, can anybody think of another word for unpack? Break it down, divide. What else? Have you heard deconstruct? Pull apart?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's what we mean. So we have a kind of a large learning target, but am I going to address how to ask questions about family, animals, likes and dislikes all in 130 minutes? Probably that's not the best thing, right? But what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on asking about likes and dislikes first, maybe in what context? Family, because do I know what I like and dislike? Do I know what my mom and dad like and dislike? So I'm going to probably start with family. What can I say about how family likes and dislikes it? And what might I go to next?
Animals.
Animals.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to start with me, then I'm going to do family, then I'm going to say dogs don't like cats, do they? Maybe some do, okay? So that's what we mean by take apart or deconstruct, is break it down into the smaller pieces. And especially for a novice, they don't know anything that we don't teach them, do they? They don't know anything we don't teach them. We have to teach them the little pieces. And the beauty of this is what skill, what function are they getting practice with over and over and over when I break it down? Telling likes and dislikes. That's a really functional proficiency type of a skill. I can tell what I like and dislike in any context now because I know how to do it. Does that make a little sense too?
Yep.
Thank you, Rubab.
Yep. So let's now unpack, deconstruct this one can do, and we'll see how that plays out. So we have different ways that this is going to be kind of fleshed out for you. I can identify my family members. We do this a lot with our novice level students. I can find out who is in your family. I can say what I do with my family. And it's an example of how to actually get into mini learning targets. And Greta's talked about this a little bit more. We're talking about mini learning targets, and that gets down to each episode then. You're going to sequence it, okay, well, maybe the first episode when you're addressing this one target is going to be just the family. Now you don't assume that they know it now. You do a learning check. If they don't have it, you go into the second learning episode and they do it in another fashion. It's always recycling the same kind of content to some extent, but having them do it in different ways, presenting it to you in different ways. And this is what we have seen through research and also through how we look at proficiency. This is how it actually, their performance improves throughout this process. Okay, and the sample that's provided here, if you read the interpersonal learning goal can-do statement, stresses that it's broad in nature, but then they show that the learning target are the steps to get to the broader statement. So this is a lot of content, text here on this particular slide. So we won't spend too much time on it, but you'll see that we're going directly from the necessitable actful global benchmark to the can-do statement, and then it's further broken down into the learning target. So again, it's proposal, curriculum template, can-do statement, now we're getting into the learning plan. And this is what we're coming to now, what the learning plan actually looks like now. So you'll see how this is going to kind of come together. To animate, I just keep pushing this. So the targeted performance level can do interpretive listening learning target. Say we're going to have this. And programs do not have to have the global benchmark on the plan. They simply indicate the performance level. The program then selects the appropriate can-do statements for this learning plan. Here you can see that the can-do statements are taken directly from the template. Okay. And it's coming up. There we go. So I can ask and answer simple questions about family, animals, likes and dislikes, then interpretive listening, something else right there as well. So those are the learning goals under there. So the first would be an opening activity. The learning plan keeps the field that asked for the opening activity in recognition of the fact that it is critical to capture the attention of the learner. You want to get that hook of how do you actually get them interested and engaged into the learning plan for the day or for that sequence of learning episodes that you'll be doing.
And we've used as our example that model unit, My World and the World of Mulan, so that you'll see this is where we're getting our content. But you would, of course, put in the things that are specific to your curriculum and your themes.
And again, remember depending on the age level of your students, the proficiency level, the language, I mean, so many varying factors can come in. We understand with the learning plan and with the diversity of STARTALK programs that we have, it's going to vary. So no one program's learning plans are going to look exactly the same as anybody else's. Keep that in mind as you kind of go forward with this and take this information back to your teachers. So here's something else, a learning target then, it provides the focus for the learning episode. Remember, going back to that original slide, we looked at what is a learning plan. It gives us focus for what we're doing. The learning plan is limited to stages 1 and 2. We're only looking at those right now. We'll talk about stages a little bit later. But we're looking at, okay, in stage 1, the target is there. What do learners need to know to meet that can do? That's very, very important in stage 1. So that information has to be filled out in the learning plan. Let me see. Then it asks for the check for learning that will allow learners to demonstrate that they have met the learning target. That's going to be a refrain you're going to hear a lot. The learning check. How do you know that the students have actually understood and can demonstrate to you that they have acquired that information and that they can now actually implement that or use that information themselves to do something and communicate with you?
And that's how we're going to define stage 2.
Yes.
So this is what we mean when we say stage 1 and 2 for each learning episode. What's the can do? What do they need to know in order to do the can do? And then what will I do as a teacher to check that they've learned what they need to learn to go on to my next step? That's what we mean by stage 1 and 2, just these 2 things.
So that means, we walk into a classroom where we're seeing a lesson plan being implemented. Very often we'll see teachers, they're doing a lot of the talking, they're communicating to the students, they're walking around. But then that sequence of events is confined. We don't see the actual check for learning that needs to be there for movement to happen to the next stage of that lesson, for example. So this is a reminder in each of these episodes that there will always be a space for the teacher to do that. And here's check for learning.
Okay, all right. So every learning target then is going to be aligned to a check for learning. Okay, what will they be required to do, say, make, or write by the end of the episode that is going to show me that they're ready to move on to the next thing? Okay. Now, one thing we want to make clear, I might work the same learning target for several learning episodes, right? I might work it 2 or 3 learning episodes. I still want to have a check for learning. And then what might happen is that check for learning is a little bit more complex and then a little bit more complex. It's like I'm going to add something to it, now I'm going to check for that. Then I add the next one and now I check for that. So it's not the same check for learning. It's going to respond to what happens in the instruction, okay? And this is really important because we have our kids for such a short time, right? We have it for such a short time. We really need to make sure they're learning what we're presenting to them, and we don't kind of get lulled into thinking that just because I presented it and they did the activity, they learned it, right? Because we know that in reality that doesn't happen. Now, we have some things to help, because I'm sure some of you are already thinking right now, oh my gosh, that means I've got to have 11 different checks for learning in one day. And I really only think I know 2, and one of them is this and one of them is that, okay? The good news is we have resources for you on the STARTALK website that should help, okay? Greg Duncan has a wonderful publication on the website. It's called Checking for Learning. And look at all of these things that we just put on this slide that we pulled from him. And think about, too, checking for learning doesn't have to be just oral speech, but it can be. Mm-hmm. It could be an exit ticket. Before they go out to recess, they walk by you at the door and they say one sentence about their family as they walk out the door. That's a check for learning. But it could also be visual. It could be draw this. It could be written. It could be loads of other things. So this is one thing we realized you're going to be increasing in your knowledge and your expertise as you do this. And this is where, going back to your cadre of teachers, your teachers are very creative. They are very good at what they do. And all we need to do is make sure they know what they need to do. And they're going to come up with all these really creative things to do. And maybe at the very beginning, it really might just be this. But what we do know is it can't be this all day long, right? It can't be this all day long. Right. Maybe one time. Maybe just one time, because then it needs to be more complex, right? It needs to be a little bit more. It's not that just you recognize the word. Now what can you do? Can you put it in a phrase? Can you use it at the right time? So don't fret about this. And another thing, don't forget we have Professor Google, right? Just Google checks for learning, checks for understanding, because we also have some very sharing colleagues who teach languages, and they share the wonderful things that they have developed on the web. So we can also do that. So again, I know this looks a little crazy here, but this is part of that annotated learning plan that is on page, whatever those pages were, 38 and 39 of your spiral book. So this is just identifying, here's the learning targets, here's what they need to know and do, and here's my check for learning. So it just goes across the page. And I can add a row, just like Laura was talking about for the curriculum template. When I've got more can-do statements, I just add a row for however many learning episodes I have that day. Okay? All right, so I've got every learning target is aligned with a check for learning. Okay? Okay, so we'll do a comprehension check. Give me a 5. 5 means I truly understand the relationship between the learning target, the culture, the content, and the check for learning. 3 means I'm getting there. A 1 or a 0 mean I'm still I'm just really not there. So 5 to 0. 5 means I know it well enough I could tell somebody else, because guess what? You're going to have to do that. You're going to have to go back. So give us your hands. Give me your fist. 5 to fist. 5, I know it. I could teach it to somebody else. 3, I'm getting there. 1 or 0, still not quite. Okay. Well, the good news is we've got some more examples for you. Multiple meaningful opportunities to get the content. So we did that was 20 minutes, and we did a comprehension check. We did a check for learning, okay? And so it doesn't have to be formal, written down. It depends on where I am in the learning cycle, where I am. All right.
Stage 3, to give you an idea, stage 3 is basically this information, the materials that are needed, and then the reflection and so on. So that might be helpful if you're going to kind of go a little bit beyond. That's helpful for us to see too for previous days that we haven't been there. And again, this is stage 3, the learning experience and activities that occur at the beginning and in the middle of the learning episode. It is optional, but depending on the experience level of your teachers, you may want to or need to have teachers complete this form. So basically, STARTALK is saying that we are placing the focus on learning, and how teachers get students to learn is up to them. We don't want to come in and micromanage. That's not our intent to do this at all. It's just to make sure that those checks for learning are there and to make sure that learning is taking place and that progression in students' learning is taking place. That is our key concern, the progression of learning. So yes, we know everyone is trying to exceed expectations, not just meet them. So again, coming back to the annotated version of the learning plan, it's shown on page 38 and 39 of the PD guide. This will further explain the intent of the document. So it's really helpful to go back to your teachers after this, after you've also had a chance to look at it yourself, and discuss it with them. There's also a sample learning plan for my world and the world of Mulan on the STARTALK website. In addition, there's other learning templates as well that you definitely are very, very welcome to go ahead and take a look at some of those. The learning plan does not ask for an explanation of input. It does not ask for an explanation of guided practice. The learning plan asks for the application and the check for learning. Okay? And here is how we're talking about the connection between the stages. So if you're going to complete stage 3, you may want to change the order of the fields, placing learning activities for episode 1 directly after episode 1. That's helpful to kind of keep everything clear. Point out connections between the two sections here that we're talking about. So episode 1, you see that in the first rectangle, the white rectangle, and then learning activities for episode 1. So that kind of comes directly after one another. Now it's going to be your turn to do this. Fill out a learning plan.
We're going to do, you're going to participate with your table. Remember, we're not doing no audience participation for this, so feel free. All right, I'm going to read this to you because it's very small. And I know y'all in the back can't read it because I can't read it from right up here. So what we're going to do, we're going to practice. We're going to watch a video clip, a very short video clip, and we're going to try to figure out, because this is what we do. This is what we do when we come. We're going to watch and we try to figure out, what do we think the can-do statement was? What was the can-do statement and where's the check for learning? Okay? We're going to try to figure that out. So what you're going to see, this is a demo lesson. So this is not with real students. It's a demonstration, a simulation done at a STARTALK conference. And the intent of the lesson is to demonstrate target language teaching, even for young learners. All right? So it is an elementary lesson for first graders with no experience in Portuguese. But what we want you to focus on is not what the teacher is doing, but on what the students are doing. Figure out what is the can-do statement and what's the check for learning. The audience is not first graders because this is a simulation. So the audience are teachers, are people just like you who do not speak Portuguese, right? So we're doing this little simulation there. And the lesson is about making connections with math, okay? That's the context. And so we're not going to make a judgment about how the lesson was taught. That was what we used this lesson for before, but what we're going to do now, we're going to try to figure out, what are we going to try to figure out? The can-do statement and what the check for learning is, okay? All right, so I'm going to click us away, and hopefully you'll be able to hear this, okay? So we're going to watch the video, think about the can-do statement that might have been done for the lesson, and identify how the teacher checks for learning. Everybody clear? Okay, here we go. So it's right in the middle. Okay, so are you seeing the students? Okay, just keep your eye on what the students are doing, and remember, what's the can-do statement?
Dois, três. Eu quero ouvir. Vamos lá. Losango da bandeira do Brasil é amarelo e tem 4 pontas. Muito bem.
Okay, look again. She's going to demonstrate again. Okay, look again. What's the can-do statement and how is she checking for learning?
Muito bem, criança. Aham. Sim. Muito bem.
Okay, are you ready now? Just talk at your table. Talk at your table. What do you think is the can-do statement and how did she check for learning? Just talk at your table. Talk at your table. What do you think it was? All right, when your table, you think you have an answer, just raise your hand. When you think you can decide, raise your hand. All right, I see some hands being raised. You think you have an answer, raise your hand. Thank you very much. Very good, tables. Okay, are you ready to say what I thought? And I didn't write this lesson. I didn't see the learning plan. So here's what I thought the can-do statement. I can recognize and describe colors and shapes. And then I saw, well, that's the opening activity, okay? So I can describe. And what is it that they had to know? They had to know colors. They had to know shapes. And we didn't watch long enough, but they had to know numbers, all the numbers in the universe. Really just 1 through 6 if we watched that whole lesson. And so how did she check for learning? What I thought was, she put a sentence up there with blanks, and what was the clue that she gave them?
Colors and shapes.
Visuals. She gave them visuals, right? So all they had to produce by themselves, these novice first graders, right? This is who this would be. The only thing they had to produce with their partner was color and shape, and they read that sentence together. That was her check for learning. And so then she's going to go on. Once she knows they know these 4 colors, these 4 shapes, these numbers 1 through 6, then she's going to move on, right? That's what I thought. And so see how it kind of flows together? And it's not like she paused and went, okay, class, now is the check for learning. You know, she didn't do that. It was part of her instruction, right? But she knew that she had to do that before she could go on. Now, what do you think she would have done if no one could say blue, circle? Then now my next learning episode would be reviewing that maybe in a different way, right? That's why it's so critical that we do this. Okay, so she unpacked this big one. I can recognize and describe the colors and shapes of the Brazilian flag and the American flag. That was her big one. So can you think, just in your mind right now, can you think of all the little mini can-do statements she had to teach them before they could do that? Mini can, I love that. It's just a mini, it's just one little detail. Of course we can. Okay, we're going to go on, and so here's what she did. I would imagine, well, she's got to teach them colors, but not all the colors in the universe. What told her what colors to teach first? The colors of the flag. Do you think those are the only colors they're ever going to learn? No, they're going to learn those at another time, right? And then shapes. And what shapes did she have to teach them? Whatever was on the flag. Okay, and then they did this, remember, because they're connecting with math. They're connecting with math, so they did angles. How many angles are on a square? 4. How many angles are on a circle? 0. Okay, so that's what we hope that you would see.
So here we can talk about, okay, this is it's bringing back to the learning plan template, showing that the possible learning targets, what they could be. Again, it's possible. You could add on, you could also subtract from it. So based on the students that you have in front of you, you're going to adapt these maybe depending on the day that the students are with you, any number of things. It can change. We don't want you to think that the learning plan is static. The learning episodes are also there to say, okay, if you need to modify things, change things as the students are presenting things to you, you can do that. But the learning check is really important for that to happen, so it's not random. I think I just need the clicker to...
Oh, it's right here.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
sorry.
I was that kind of teacher.
Here, we're coming back to the annotated learning plan, and there's lots of resources that are going to be available to you that are going to help you go through this. So I'm just going to click through some of this. So everyone's seeing these on the 2 pages we're talking about. But again, coming back to this, hopefully you feel that these words apply to the new learning plan and to the curriculum template and the learning plan template in general. That it has a flow to it, it's efficient, that you have relevant real-world activities that are part of it, it's differentiated, there's a cohesion to a learning plan, meaning that you've set the learning targets and that everything is flowing from that concern at the very, very top. And it's sequenced. Those are the ways that I come in and see a learning plan or a learning experience happening for students in a program. And I say, oh, well, this is the context. This is their theme. This is the learning targets that they've set based on the can-dos that they have also identified. So I should be able to find all of that in a learning plan then. Okay. So coming back to our learning targets that we talked about, how did you do? Do you think that this is our learning check, basically? Do you feel more comfortable with answering yes or no to some of these can-dos? And these are the goals for the lesson that we had today. And again, it's just, we're talking about explaining the connection between a lesson and a learning experience. That's what we want you to take back to your program, to your teachers, and convey that to them. How do they do that for each other as peers as well? Have them go over some of these discussions. I can unpack a can-do statement into individual learning targets. I can design a check for learning or look at the resources that we provided and go to those checks for understanding and design additional ones if needed. And I can explain the learning plan requirements to instructors in my program. Again, this is we have very gifted teachers and very dedicated teachers in StartALK. We know all of them are working very, very hard, and some of this stuff is going to be instinctual to them. They're already doing it. It just needs to be spelled out a little bit more in the learning plans. And this is partly as a result, we're creating these resources and asking for this because as we've been collecting lesson plans over the past few years, we've seen that there's some people that are doing it really well and very kind of clearly stating it for us. In other cases, it's perhaps not as consistent. So we're trying to create a bit more consistency by having this learning plan be a little bit more systematic in its presentation and connection to the curriculum template and to the proposal that we originally came to start with everything. So again, keep calm and pretend it's on the lesson plan. That's what we're going to end with today here. We all know about lesson plans from our student programs, and the new version of the StartALK lesson plan is not that different. It's just been re-envisioned a little bit, and it's now become the learning plan, a concept that also applies to the teacher programs, and you'll be hearing about it from that sphere if you're also part in any way of the teacher program. And it's embedded in the online curriculum template. So hopefully we'll see, we don't know, but maybe that will be also online at some point.
Yeah, that'd be nice if it would.
Great, yes. So as a final kind of thing here, we want to talk about, if you have any questions, we'd like you to take your questions. We're not going to take them here right now, but there's a Google Doc that you can go to using this particular URL and put those questions or concerns that you have there, and we can actually take those and inform our planning for the future about it, or if we need to provide additional resources to you. So if you have any questions or comments, please go ahead and refer to this for us. Thank you very much for your help today, and we hope that this is going to help you in the future. Thank you.